There are moments in history when civilizations are defeated by foreign enemies. And then there are moments far more shocking, when they are destroyed by those who were supposed to stand beside them. At the beginning of the 13th century, Constantinople was still one of the greatest cities on earth. Behind its legendary walls stood magnificent churches glittering with gold, libraries preserving the knowledge of the ancient world, and palaces that had astonished travelers for generations. It remained the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the last surviving heir of Rome. Although its power was no longer what it had once been, few cities could rival its wealth, its culture, or its prestige. To Christians across Europe, Constantinople was not simply another distant capital. It was one of the great centers of the Christian faith. Pilgrims admired its sacred relics. Kings respected its ancient traditions. Even those who had never seen its walls knew of its immense riches and its seemingly endless treasures. No one imagined that the greatest danger facing the city would come not from Muslim armies, nor from nomadic invaders, nor from rival empires. It would come from fellow Christians. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 remains one of the most extraordinary betrayals in history. Instead of defending Christendom, an army gathered under the banner of the cross turned its weapons against Christianity's greatest city. The consequences would echo for centuries, weakening Byzantium so severely that many historians believe the empire never truly recovered. To understand how such an unimaginable event became possible, we must first look far beyond the battlefield. The story begins with an idea that had inspired Europe for more than 100 years, the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II had called upon the knights of Western Europe to journey east and reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. His speech ignited one of the largest military movements medieval Europe had ever witnessed. Thousands of nobles, knights, peasants, and adventurers answered the call, believing that fighting in the Holy Land would bring both spiritual salvation and earthly glory. Against all expectations, the First Crusade succeeded. Jerusalem was captured in 1099, and Christian kingdoms were established across parts of the eastern Mediterranean. For many in Europe, it seemed like a miracle, but miracles rarely last forever. Over the following century, the Crusader states faced relentless pressure from powerful Muslim rulers determined to reclaim their lands. Cities fell one after another. Armies were defeated. By the end of the 12th century, the legendary Muslim commander Saladin had recaptured Jerusalem, delivering a devastating blow to Christian Europe. The loss sent shockwaves across the continent. Once again, popes urged Christian rulers to launch another great expedition to the east. This would become the Fourth Crusade. On paper, its objective appeared straightforward. A powerful European army would travel by sea to Egypt, then considered one of the strongest centers of Muslim power. From there, they would strike toward Jerusalem and restore Christian control over the Holy City. It sounded like a carefully planned campaign. Reality proved very different. Unlike earlier crusades, transporting thousands of soldiers across the Mediterranean required enormous resources. Ships capable of carrying men, horses, weapons, and supplies did not simply appear overnight. Only one city possessed the naval strength to make such an operation possible: Venice. At the beginning of the 13th century, Venice was rising as one of the richest commercial powers in Europe. Built upon islands in a lagoon, the Republic controlled vast trading networks stretching from Spain to the Black Sea. Venetian merchants dealt in silk, spices, grain, timber, precious metals, and luxury goods from every corner of the known world. Their ships dominated Mediterranean commerce. Their leaders understood something as well as any emperor: trade meant power. When Crusader representatives approached Venice seeking transportation, the Republic agreed to an extraordinary contract. The Venetians would construct a massive fleet capable of carrying more than 30,000 Crusaders across the sea. In return, they demanded an enormous payment. It was one of the largest financial agreements of the medieval era. The Venetians committed nearly their entire economy to the project. Shipyards worked continuously. Carpenters shaped timber into warships and transport vessels. Sailmakers produced vast quantities of canvas. Blacksmiths forged anchors, chains, and fittings. Thousands of workers spent months preparing what would become one of Europe's greatest naval expeditions. Everything depended upon one assumption, that the Crusaders would arrive with enough money. They did not. When the army finally gathered in Venice during the summer of 1202, far fewer Crusaders appeared than expected. Many had chosen different routes to the Holy Land. Others had abandoned the expedition altogether. The result was disastrous. The Crusaders could not pay what they owed. Even after gathering every available coin, they remained deeply in debt. For Venice, this created a serious problem. The Republic had invested enormous wealth into a fleet that now sat idle in its harbors. Allowing the Crusaders to leave without payment would mean catastrophic financial losses. The aging but brilliant Doge of Venice, Enrico Dandolo, proposed a solution. Instead of paying immediately, the Crusaders could repay part of their debt by helping Venice capture a rebellious city called Zara on the Adriatic coast. It was a profitable port. It had once belonged to Venice. Now it refused Venetian authority. There was only one complication. Zara was a Christian city. The Crusaders had sworn to fight Muslims. Instead, before even reaching the Holy Land, they found themselves preparing to attack fellow Christians. Some were deeply uncomfortable. Others argued that without Venice, the crusade would collapse entirely. Reluctantly, most accepted the proposal. In November 1202, the combined Venetian and Crusader fleet surrounded Zara. The city's defenses were impressive but hopelessly outmatched. After a brief siege, Zara surrendered. Christian soldiers entered a Christian city carrying the banners of the cross. Homes were looted. Churches were damaged. Citizens suffered at the hands of men who had promised to defend Christendom. News of the attack reached Pope Innocent III. His reaction was immediate. Furious that Crusaders had attacked fellow Christians, he condemned the assault and declared that those responsible would be excommunicated. It should have ended the expedition. Instead, events became even more extraordinary. While the Crusaders spent the winter in Zara, an unexpected visitor arrived. He carried an offer so astonishing that it would change the course of history. His name was Alexios Angelos. He was the son of a deposed Byzantine emperor years earlier. Political rivals in Constantinople had overthrown his father, blinded him, and imprisoned him inside the imperial capital. Alexios himself had escaped and now wandered Europe searching for allies willing to restore his family's throne. Most rulers ignored him. The Crusaders did not. Standing before their leaders, Alexios made promises that seemed almost impossible to refuse. If they helped place him on the throne of Constantinople, he would pay them an enormous sum of money, far more than enough to settle every debt owed to Venice. He promised provisions for the crusade. He promised soldiers to accompany them to the Holy Land. He even promised to help reunite the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches under papal authority. For Crusader leaders facing financial ruin, it sounded like divine intervention. Instead of abandoning the crusade, they could solve every problem at once. All they had to do was sail to Constantinople. To many of the Crusaders, Alexios' proposal seemed almost too good to be true. Constantinople was the richest city in the Christian world. If the young prince kept even half of his promises, the expedition would be rescued from financial disaster. Their debts to Venice could be paid. Fresh soldiers could join the campaign. Supplies could be gathered for the journey to Jerusalem. What had begun as a failing crusade suddenly appeared to have a future once again, but not everyone agreed. Some knights argued that interfering in the politics of the Byzantine Empire had nothing to do with the vows they had taken before God. They had crossed Europe to liberate Jerusalem, not to decide who should wear the imperial crown in Constantinople. Every mile sailed toward the Byzantine capital carried them farther away from the Holy Land. Yet practical concerns began to outweigh religious ideals. Without money, there would be no crusade. Without ships, there would be no journey. Without Venice, the expedition would simply dissolve. Slowly, resistance faded. In the spring of 1203, one of the largest fleets Europe had ever assembled lifted its anchors and sailed east, not toward Egypt, but toward Constantinople. For many Crusaders, this would be their first glimpse of the legendary city they had heard about since childhood. Nothing had prepared them for what they saw. As their ships crossed the Sea of Marmara, Constantinople emerged from the horizon like something from another world. Its enormous walls stretched for miles across the land. Hundreds of towers rose above the skyline. Churches crowned with glittering domes reflected the sunlight. The busy harbors overflowed with merchant vessels arriving from every corner of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Even hardened soldiers fell silent. Western Europe possessed impressive castles and prosperous towns, but nothing approached the scale of Constantinople. London, Paris, Cologne, and Venice itself seemed modest beside the capital of the Byzantine Empire. One Crusader later admitted that he had never imagined such a city could exist anywhere on Earth. Yet beneath its magnificent appearance, Constantinople was deeply divided. The empire had spent decades weakened by political intrigue, corruption, and endless struggles for power. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Noble families competed for influence, while ordinary citizens grew increasingly frustrated with unstable government. The arrival of the Crusader fleet only deepened the crisis. Alexios expected the people to welcome him as the rightful heir to the throne. They did not. Most citizens viewed the Crusaders with suspicion. Centuries of growing tension had created deep mistrust between the Greek-speaking Orthodox East and the Latin Catholic West. Although both considered themselves Christian, their differences had become impossible to ignore. Religious disputes had poisoned relations. Political rivalry had widened the divide. Mutual distrust had become almost permanent to many Byzantines. The Crusaders were not liberators. They were dangerous foreigners standing outside their walls. Negotiations quickly collapsed. When diplomacy failed, the Crusaders prepared for war. The attack began in July 1203. Venetian ships approached the massive sea walls protecting the city, while Crusader forces advanced across the land defenses. Arrows darkened the sky. Siege ladders slammed against stone fortifications. Defenders poured missiles onto attackers struggling to climb the walls. For a time, Constantinople resisted exactly as it had resisted countless enemies before. Its defenses remained among the strongest ever constructed. But the Venetians possessed one advantage no previous attackers had enjoyed. They were masters of naval warfare. Using specially modified ships, Venetian soldiers managed to reach sections of the sea walls that defenders considered almost impossible to assault. Fierce fighting erupted high above the harbor as men battled across narrow towers and battlements. Eventually, several defensive positions fell. Fires broke out across nearby districts. Smoke drifted over the city. Inside Constantinople, panic spread rapidly. Instead of organizing a determined defense, Emperor Alexios III made a decision that stunned everyone. He fled, under cover of darkness. The emperor abandoned the capital, taking what treasure he could carry before disappearing into the countryside. The empire suddenly found itself without a ruler. Faced with political chaos, Byzantine officials released the imprisoned Isaac II, the deposed emperor and father of Prince Alexios. Soon afterward, the young prince entered Constantinople alongside the Crusaders. His promise had been fulfilled. Father and son now ruled together as co-emperors. At first, it appeared that the gamble had succeeded. The Crusaders expected immediate payment. Instead, they encountered a harsh reality. Alexios IV had promised wealth that the empire simply did not possess. Years of mismanagement had emptied the imperial treasury. The money required to satisfy the Crusaders did not exist. Desperate to honor his commitments, the new emperor imposed heavy taxes, confiscated valuable treasures, and even ordered precious objects from churches to be melted down. The measures achieved little. Instead of calming the situation, they inflamed public anger. Ordinary citizens watched as sacred treasures disappeared. Merchants complained about rising taxes. Nobles resented foreign influence over imperial decisions. Many blamed Alexios for placing Latin Crusaders above his own people. Meanwhile, the Crusaders grew impatient. Weeks became months. Payments arrived slowly, often far smaller than promised. Supplies remained limited. Every passing day increased tensions between the two sides. Small arguments escalated into violent confrontations. Latin soldiers clashed with Byzantine citizens in the streets. Fires once again swept through neighborhoods, destroying homes and businesses. Distrust hardened into open hatred. The alliance that had restored Alexios to power was collapsing before everyone's eyes. Then, early in 1204, everything changed. A palace revolution overthrew Alexios IV. The young emperor was imprisoned. Shortly afterward, he was killed. A new ruler seized the throne. His name was Alexios V. Doukas. Unlike his predecessor, Alexios V had no intention of cooperating with the Crusaders. He immediately strengthened the city's defenses. Negotiations ended. The remaining promises were declared void. The Crusaders suddenly found themselves outside Constantinople once again, still unpaid, still burdened by debt, and now facing open hostility from the very empire they had helped restore. Their patience finally broke. What had begun as a political intervention transformed into something far darker. Crusader leaders gathered to discuss their next move. Some still argued that the expedition should continue toward Jerusalem. Others insisted that the Byzantine Empire had betrayed them. Venetian leaders viewed the situation differently. Constantinople was not merely a city. It was the greatest commercial prize in the Mediterranean. Its wealth could erase every debt. Its ports could dominate Eastern trade. Its treasures were beyond imagination. Gradually, a terrifying decision emerged. They would not simply force another emperor onto the throne. They would take the city for themselves. The crusade that had begun with prayers to liberate Jerusalem had become a campaign to conquer the greatest Christian city in the world. Within weeks, soldiers bearing the cross would launch one of the most devastating assaults medieval Europe had ever witnessed. And what followed would leave scars that neither empire nor church would ever fully heal. On the morning of April 12, 1204, the fate of Constantinople hung in the balance. For nearly 9 centuries, the city had stood as the greatest fortress in Christendom. Persians had failed to take it. Arab caliphs had marched against it and returned defeated. Powerful Bulgarian rulers had tested its defenses without success. Time and again, its walls had protected the last Roman Empire from destruction. Now, another army stood before those same walls, but this enemy carried the cross. The Crusaders launched their assault with everything they possessed. Venetian ships advanced toward the sea walls while knights and infantry attacked from the land. The defenders fought desperately, raining arrows, stones, and spears upon the attackers. Once again, Constantinople resisted with remarkable determination. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain. Then fortune shifted. Strong winds pushed several Venetian ships close enough to the walls for assault bridges to be lowered directly onto the battlements. Crusaders stormed across the narrow bridges, engaging Byzantine defenders in brutal hand-to-hand combat high above the harbor. One tower fell, then another. The breach was small, but it was enough. Once attackers secured a foothold inside the defenses, panic spread rapidly through the city. Byzantine soldiers attempted to organize a counterattack, but confusion overwhelmed coordination. Emperor Alexios V realized the situation was becoming hopeless. Like the emperor before him, he fled during the night. For the third time in less than a year, Constantinople had been abandoned by its ruler. By dawn, the greatest city of the Byzantine Empire belonged to the Crusaders. What happened next shocked even many who took part in it. Military victories were common in medieval history. What followed was something far worse. For 3 days, Constantinople was subjected to one of the most devastating sacks the medieval world had ever witnessed. Discipline collapsed almost immediately. Soldiers poured through the streets searching for anything of value. Palaces were broken open. Wealthy homes were stripped of their treasures. Shops were emptied. Warehouses were looted. Priceless works of art collected over centuries disappeared in a matter of hours. Gold, silver, jewels, silk, religious relics, anything that could be carried was taken. The city that had accumulated the wealth of empires became the prize of an uncontrolled army. But material loss was only part of the tragedy. Some of Constantinople's greatest churches were desecrated. Altars were broken apart. Sacred manuscripts vanished forever. Ancient icons were stolen or destroyed. Objects that generations had regarded as holy were treated as ordinary plunder. The magnificent church of Hagia Sophia, the spiritual heart of the Byzantine world, suffered humiliation unlike anything in its history. For centuries, emperors had been crowned beneath its vast dome. Patriarchs had led solemn ceremonies within its walls. Pilgrims had traveled across continents simply to witness its beauty. Now armed soldiers filled its sacred spaces. Contemporary chroniclers described scenes of chaos that horrified even many medieval observers. Horses were reportedly brought into the great church. Precious furnishings were dismantled for their valuable metals. Religious treasures accumulated over hundreds of years disappeared forever into the hands of victorious soldiers. Not every account agrees on every detail, but all agree on one fact. The scale of destruction was immense. Ordinary citizens suffered alongside their city. Families fled through burning streets searching for safety. Many were robbed of everything they owned. Others sought refuge inside churches that no longer offered protection. Fear spread faster than fire. For those who survived, the psychological wound proved even deeper than the physical destruction. They had not been conquered by traditional enemies. They had been betrayed by fellow Christians. News of the sack spread rapidly across Europe. Many celebrated the victory. Others reacted with disbelief. Even Pope Innocent III, who had originally called for the Crusade, condemned many of the atrocities committed during the capture of the city. The expedition had been created to defend Christianity, not to devastate one of its greatest centers. But condemnation came too late. The damage had already been done. Soon afterward, the Crusader leaders divided the spoils of victory. Vast quantities of treasure were loaded onto Venetian ships and carried westward. Countless relics, sculptures, manuscripts, and works of art disappeared from Constantinople forever. Even today, visitors walking through parts of Venice can still see Byzantine columns, statues, and treasures brought back after 1204. They remain silent reminders of one of history's greatest acts of cultural plunder. Politically, the Byzantine Empire ceased to exist. In its place, the Crusaders established the Latin Empire of Constantinople. A Western European emperor now ruled from the imperial palace once occupied by Roman emperors. Byzantine nobles fled to territories beyond Crusader control, where they established successor states and vowed to reclaim their lost capital. Although they eventually succeeded in recovering Constantinople in 1261, the empire that returned was only a shadow of its former self. Its treasury had been exhausted. Its population had declined. Its economy had been shattered. Many of its greatest artistic and religious treasures were gone forever. The walls still stood. The churches still dominated the skyline. But the strength that had once made Constantinople the greatest city of the medieval world had been broken. The consequences reached far beyond Byzantium. Relations between the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches suffered damage that has never been fully erased. Distrust hardened into bitterness. The memory of 1204 became a symbol of betrayal for generations of Byzantines, shaping attitudes toward the West long after the Crusaders themselves had disappeared. In many ways, the Fourth Crusade achieved the exact opposite of its original purpose. Jerusalem was never recovered. Christian unity was shattered even further. The strongest Christian empire in the East was fatally weakened, and new powers watched closely. Among them were the rising Turkish states of Anatolia. Over the following 2 centuries, the restored Byzantine Empire struggled to defend shrinking borders. Provinces were gradually lost. Revenues declined. Armies became smaller. Emperors increasingly relied on diplomacy because they no longer possessed the resources that had once protected their empire. When the Ottoman Turks emerged as a major power during the 14th century, they encountered a Byzantine Empire that had never fully recovered from the catastrophe of 1204. Many historians have asked a haunting question. Had the Fourth Crusade never attacked Constantinople, would the city have survived the Ottoman siege of 1453? No one can answer with certainty. History offers no second chances. What we do know is this: the walls that had resisted countless foreign invaders remained standing for another 2.5 centuries. But walls alone could not defend an empire whose wealth, unity, and confidence had already been shattered from within. The road to 1453 did not begin with the cannons of Sultan-maimed Iit began in 1204, when the greatest city in Christendom was betrayed by the very men who had sworn to defend it. And from that moment onward, the fate of Constantinople would never be the same.